Hello everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to the first podcast episode of the Floodgate. Joining me this morning is Romana Rubeo, joining me from Rome, Italy. Hi, Romana. Good to see you.
Hi, and hello, everybody.
So the point here, Romana, is that we are going to be discussing several important topics with certain emphasis on one topic. And today's main topic is to try to answer the question who won following the Gaza war, which we hope, of course, that the ceasefire is going to persist and the Palestinians will be able to rebuild their homes, their towns, and their refugee camps. So, Romana, your general impression of this issue?
Yes, of course. The thing, of course, that struck my imagination, and I think it was visually so impactful, was this march of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians moving from the south to the north and crossing that Netzarim corridor, which for so long has been not only a point of contention, but a very stubborn point for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who insisted the Israeli army will never withdraw from the Netzarim axis. So, my question is for you, actually, Ramzy. What do you think? Symbolically, and what is the meaning of this march from south to the north of Gaza? What does it even mean?
Well, let's just have a little background here for our listeners. First of all, why Nitsarim? I mean, that doesn't sound like an Arabic name, Nitsarim. Why is the media calling it Nitsarim, not like the Salahuddin crossing, not the Rashid Street crossing? Why Nitsarim? And that's because there was a Jewish illegal Jewish settlement in Gaza called Nitsarim, and it was really more of like a complex of settlements, and it was part of the Israeli settlements projects, colonial project in Gaza, starting in 1967, ending sometime in 2004, 2005. That's when the Israeli so-called redeployment from Gaza happened. So why did the Israelis leave Gaza? Even though Gaza remained under Israeli occupation, according to international law, but Israel did leave the heart of Gaza and did dismantle the settlements, imposing a siege on Gaza from the outside. Instead, and that's what led to the Al-Aqsa flood and the rest is history. Why did Israel leave? Israel left Gaza because of the resistance that took place in Gaza. And we are talking about resistance. And by the way, this is why from the very, very beginning of this war, I kept saying Israel will not win in Gaza. Israel will not win in Gaza. And many, many were saying the opposite. No, no, no. Not only Israel will win, sadly, Israel is going to stay for a long time. I said it's impossible. And the reason behind this is that I actually lived in Gaza. I was born and raised in Gaza. And I know the mindset and the mentality, not only of the Gazans, but also of the Israeli occupation and how much losses are they willing to pay in order for them to sustain their colonial project. The price was way too high this time around, which meant that as long as Palestinians continue to resist and the Israelis continue to lose at this rate, there will never be any permanent occupation of Gaza. And that's exactly what happened. So Netzarim was the kind of the epicenter of the former colonization of Gaza, and the Israelis meant for it to become the epicenter of the new colonization of Gaza. So when you see the Palestinians crossing Netzarim, answering your question, Romana, going all the way to the north, it was their way of overcoming that hurdle that is called Netzarim, that has been hanging over their heads for decades. And they are telling the Israelis, no, not this time around. This is different. And this time we are the ones who write history. And they did.
Indeed, I just watched a video with a Palestinian, a young Palestinian girl, telling the occupation, "How did you even dare thinking you could win against these people who has these roots to the land?" And in one of your articles, Ramzy, you wrote that this reminded you of the Great March of Return, which, in my opinion, was maybe the beginning of this phase of mobilization. Like the Great March of Return was a call, was a warning from Palestinians saying we are not relying on international diplomacy anymore. But if you ignore Palestinian demands, our demands will grow even louder. So, do you think there is a connection? Can we establish a connection between these two
I'm
phenomena?
really glad, Romana, to see that you are linking the Great March of Return. But before that, if you could just tell our listeners just a little bit about the context of that Great March of Return, so I can put it within the new context.
Yes, of course. The Great March of Return started in March 2018, and weekly we saw Palestinians in Gaza marching throughout Gaza and to the fence of Gaza, demanding one thing: their return to the ancestral lands and an end to the Israeli blockade. So week after week, for almost 2 years, we have seen Palestinians challenging Israeli snipers and tear gas. And unfortunately, by the end of the Great March of Return, over 200 Palestinians were killed and thousands were wounded, some of them unfortunately maimed permanently. But still, the message of that Great March of Return was clear: Palestinians will not be erased. And as I said, I think that reignited a spirit of mass mobilization that we still see today.
I feel like this, what is happening in Gaza right now, is going to change finally our view of history. I mean, you know that my academic studies, Romana, you know that I am focusing my understanding of Palestinian history on what we call people's history of Palestine. I went further than many other people. I am saying that not only people's history of Palestine or people's history is a proper way of trying to understand what's taking place in Palestine, but it is the best way, and currently in Gaza, the only way. The only way you can actually understand what is going on in Gaza right now is through people's history. It's like Palestinians are writing this epic, this historical epic. I don't think neither Homer nor any Hollywood movie can possibly recreate that epic, no matter how fictional they can be. So 2018, they decided to hold the Great March of Return. We were told back then that the intention behind this is to raise awareness of the plight of the Palestinians living under the Gaza siege imposed by Israel, which has killed, not just through the wars, the successive wars imposed on Palestinians, but also through the people dying from lack of medications and that sort of thing, killing thousands of Palestinians. So they wanted to raise awareness. And as you know, Palestinian refugees, about 80% of Gaza are refugees from 1948. We know that. So they also wanted to delineate another point, and that is our fate, our future is connected to our right to go back to the homes and villages from which we were expelled in 1948. So, thus, it's a great march. It is unarmed, it's peaceful. Tens of thousands, at times hundreds of thousands of people participated every Friday with the message: in the siege, allow us to go back to our homes and villages. We reported on this at the Palestine Chronicle for a very long time. And I think with time, it became almost like redundant. The same Palestinians going back, raising the same symbols and the same flags. But what many people couldn't read in that situation is that it was not a symbolic gesture. They were not just doing it to send a message, hoping that some in the media, some in mainstream media, is going to pick up on that and it could become a story so that the siege does not become just another historical injustice imposed on Palestinians. It's something that they actually internalized. They meant it. And that's the power of that message. They actually meant it. So when the Israelis agreed, or rather were forced to leave the Netzarim crossing, I think it was January 27th, you saw a million Palestinians going north. Now, and and the thing is, like as of today, the like within 2 days, we're looking here about 80% of all the Palestinians in southern Gaza have actually returned north. And the process was actually quite smooth, despite the fact that they are walking through the rubble of homes, destroyed roads, flooded roads, walking by the sea, carrying everything they continued to possess, going back to destroyed homes. But you see the smiles on their faces. It is as if 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza were reading from the same talking points, even though they had no ways of communicating. They were telling you this is the first step towards reversing the Nakba. We are going north for the first time in 76, 77 years, because the Nakba, we only went south. We only marched south. Now, for the first time in nearly 8 decades, we are marching north, and we want to continue that march at one point. So what happened in Gaza actually revived the right of return for Palestinian refugees, which we were told repeatedly, this is unrealistic, this is a pipe dream, stop talking about it, it's not going to take you anywhere. Well, the Palestinians have proved otherwise.
And this makes me think that this underestimation, this constant dehumanization and underestimation of Palestinians will cost dearly to Israel and to its Western allies, in a sense. For example, talking about the goals of this war. From the beginning, for example, Israel framed two goals on October 12, and I will quote Netanyahu here. He said, "We have set two goals for this war: to return the captives, to eliminate Hamas by destroying its military and governing capabilities." The true intent, of course, was also revealed later on when he made a reference to Amalek, saying, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you," which was a call for total destruction. But these two goals did not just remain, they also expanded. At some point, nearly a year later, for example, Netanyahu said, "The safe return of the residents of the north to their homes is another goal, and it must be reached through military action." For the resistance and for Palestinians, the goals were different. Their fight has been about stopping the Israeli aggression, stopping the ongoing violations, stopping the blockade, reclaiming the right of return, as we were saying. For example, Abu Obaid on October 7 said that that was a preemptive strike in response to the attacks on Al-Aqsa and Gaza's brutal siege. Yahya Sinwar put it even more clearly when he said, "The enemy will understand that the time of their aggression without response has ended." So Israel set out to eradicate Hamas and the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people, but we see that Hamas is still fighting, the Palestinian resistance is still fighting, the Palestinian people are still fighting despite the cost. The resistance aimed at something different. It aimed to shatter Israel's sense of impunity and to make occupation come at a cost. So nearly a year in, do you think Israel can really claim a victory in Gaza?
No, no, of course not. I mean, this is beyond question. I mean, what victory? I mean, one mistake that the Israelis have made is, especially Netanyahu, but also Smotrich and others, is that they kind of laid out all these lofty goals, and they would not. I mean, at times you feel like, okay, they are coming down the tree. You're talking about destroying Hamas, and then later on starts talking about dismantling Hamas. But then you start talking about destroying Hamas again. Then they start talking about, no, no, we will never allow Hamas to rule Gaza. Then they start talking about destroying Hamas. So they could not even stick to the message and went even further. Netanyahu, when he said, and you remember that, Romana, we were speaking about it recently, when he said, this is Israel's last war. This is as important as the war of independence.
And
This is
exist.
an existential war for Israel. And I mean, I don't want to give a far right fascist politician the benefit of the doubt, but from a narrative, from a discourse point of view, we in the media understand how important language is. Someone should have told him to shut up. Someone should have said, stop saying these things, because you are creating a situation that if one in the million You don't achieve any of these objectives. You just declared that if this, that this is the last war and you lost. You just declared it's an existential war and you lost. You just reversed the supposed achievements of your independence, which is the Palestinian Nakba and the catastrophic destruction of the Palestinian homeland in 1947, 1948. You did all of these things. So why are you undoing what you have already? But he was so certain of that victory, and were so certain of their defeat. Now, what other goals he added over time? They started talking about the Philadelphia corridor. By the way, this is a very funny thing, this Philadelphia thing, because for months we did not track, and we reported on this story at times, Romana, 24/7. We got very, very little sleep, especially in the first few months of the war, and we were trying to follow every report, every statement, every tweet. They did not talk about Philadelphia at all. The first
No.
person or people to start talking about Philadelphia is the Beasley Smotrich and others. Oh, no, no, we will never be able to start you win this war unless we take over Philadelphia, because that's where the weapons were coming to the Palestinians from Egypt, like the Egyptian army, like Sisi is actually sending weapons to Hamas. Fine. And then suddenly Netanyahu jumps on the bandwagon of Philadelphia. And then he's talking about, oh, yeah, yeah, it's all about Philadelphia. So now it becomes about Netzarim and Philadelphia and the border areas that they have occupied and dismantling or destroying Hamas and so forth and so on. And then they started talking about the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And this was not a conspiracy. This was not, they were talking about it openly, let alone, the Minister of Heritage talking about the dropping a nuclear bomb over Gaza. Let's not even talk about this. But they start talking about ethnic cleansing and just, I mean, that the Americans themselves were involved in that conversation, right?
Absolutely. The Americans were not only Americans offered total and blind support, but as much as the landscape is changing and the resistance is strong, the stronger the resistance is, the more Israel is reliant on the United States and on its support. So, this is becoming even more pronounced now. And we actually are seeing this in action even more now with Donald Trump. I think that the Israelis are, holding their expectations so much, and they're putting so many expectations on Trump. And this is not my impression. Like, think of Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who thinks of everything aside from finance anyway. Israel is collapsing, even from a financial point of view. But Bezalel Smotrich has other interests in mind. And he said that Trump's new presidency is an important opportunity to extend Israeli sovereignty over the occupied West Bank, which he keeps referring to as Judea and Samaria, of course. So he said that the only way to remove the danger of what he called the Palestinian terror state is to apply Israeli sovereignty over the occupied West Bank. They do not understand that the resistance is not about, applying their sovereignty, illegal sovereignty over a territory, but they keep relying on the US. So what do you think? How did this, phase can be analyzed?
So the Americans have been, I mean, what Trump is saying right now, repeatedly and in a very strange, odd way. People are moving north, and he's talking about moving them to Egypt and Jordan. I mean, this guy is a true joke. I mean, this is the problem when you have extremely ignorant presidents or ignorant administrations running the show. In the case of the Democrats, though, they were not ignorant. They were very savvy. They know history. Remember that picture of Biden holding the book of Rashid Khalidi,
Oh yeah, of course.
the 100-year war, or
Yeah,
uh, it just, he reads, they read, they understand. That's the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are behaving according to a very ignorant agenda, motivated entirely based on religious, spiritual prophecies, and just listening to the diktats of the Israelis, and not any Israelis, the very far right fringe of the Israelis. Well, the Democrats are savvy, but they are the true representation of liberal Zionists. So they do what they do based on strategy and all that, but ultimately they behave in the same, if not even a worse type of way towards the Palestinians.
This makes me think, for example, everybody now is, criticizing Trump for his weird proposal of moving Palestinians. But we have to say that the Democratic administration actually, that
Exactly.
was their first strategy in the beginning.
Exactly. In fact, didn't Blinken was had reported. Remember, there was a time where Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, suddenly goes to make a speech, and in which he talks that there will be no Palestinians moved to the Sinai Desert. And we were like, why is Sisi talking about this? That doesn't make any sense. It's like, is he reacting to something? And later on, the media informed us. And I think Woodward spoke about this in his book about Blinken's meetings with various Arab leaders,
Leaders, yeah.
trying to sell them the idea of removing the Palestinians. And he wasn't even talking temporary; he was talking permanently. Blinken, so he became the ambassador of Israeli ethnic cleansing. And Sisi told him, no, it's just not going to happen, not on my watch. And in fact, in Bob Woodward, yes, I do remember, he spoke about this because he said there was a single word by the Egyptian president that kind of changed the dynamics of that. And that was the word no. Now, we can talk about Sisi's actual objectives, motivations. Honestly, as a Gazan, as a Palestinian, I don't even care. What
Yeah,
really matters is that my people were not ethnically cleansed, even though Blinken was leading a crusade to ensure that they were being ethnically cleansed. Who won at the end? I mean, if you want to talk about winning, who won at the end? And before we even conclude this point, let me just say something else. Who were the two parties that fought against each other within the Western conglomerate in World War II? There were like two groups of people, the Nazis and the fascists fighting against the supposed liberal allies, right?
yeah.
Think about it this way, which is, I find it astonishing that for the first time in many, many years, both of these camps unified, and they unified around a new Holocaust, which tells you, just between us, don't tell anybody, that the Germans have won. The Nazi mentality of Germany eventually prevailed, and they
Absolutely.
won, unified around the idea of committing a genocide against the Palestinians. And they still lost. Blinken tried to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, and they still lost. They carried on with debates, what kind of bombs should the Americans give to the Israelis? And at the end, they agreed to give them enough bombs that would be the equivalent of numerous nuclear bombs, just to be very specific. In the first 3 weeks of the war, between October 7, 2023, and I think November 2nd, there was a report that was issued by the Euromed Monitor in Geneva that said, in the first 3 weeks of the war, more or less, the equivalent of two nuclear bombs were dropped over Gaza. Now think about it, 471 days of bombs being dropped over Gaza. How many nuclear bombs are there within these? You would say, well, but there's the radiation issue. Well, we know that the Israelis are using depleted uranium. So, no, the radiation issue is still there. And you still lost. What can you do to win against these people? Because you don't tell me Yasin 105 and Shawab and few explosives that they improvised based on the bombs that the Israelis dropped on them, and they were not did not. Don't tell me that. And simply because, look at Arab armies, look at the Egyptian army, the Jordanian, look at the Palestinian Authority, look how
Yeah.
many fighters and how. So it's not the issue of weapons here. It's not the issue of bombs that explodes. It's the issue of some kind of collective faith, collective power, collective will of the Palestinian people that made them win.
When we speak about resistance, indeed, we are not just speaking about the power of weapons and the military power, because these would be ridiculous. But can I say that for those like us at the Palestine Chronicle who were following closely the actions of the resistance, it wasn't a complete surprise. It wasn't a surprise October 7, and it wasn't a surprise that the resistance managed to deal with this phase. And we have followed the phases, the several stages of this unity of the squares and these axis of resistance. So the Palestinian unity, you have written repeatedly, Ramzy, in your articles, that the Palestinian unity at some point shifted from being just a concept of political unity, and namely, the unity between, of course, the leading forces of Fatah and Hamas, to the unification of resistance, including armed resistance. And so this term, with that al-Sahat, the unity of the squares, expanded the concept of unity. And in June 2023, Ramzy, we reported at the Palestine Chronicle about an interview that Ayman Nufal, who was a member of the General Military Council of the Al-Qassam Brigades, who was killed by Israel in the first days of this war in October 2023. Nufal at the time spoke at length about this concept during an interview. And I would like to read this quote because I think it's very interesting to understand what is happening now. He said, "The circles of resistance, of course, are expanding around Jerusalem from Palestine occupied in 48 through the West Bank, Gaza, and the parties of the axis of resistance to the masses of the Arab and Islamic nation and the free world." Now, this free world concept, we have learned this concept and we know it more. But at the time, it was one of the first time it was mentioned. And each role, he continued, is important and obligatory. Gaza, with its resistance and its common room, referring also to the joint room of operations, is the long arm, the sword, and the solid shield of these squares with its proactive and strong national decision. So the unity of the squares is not just about Palestine, but also abroad with strategic alliances with Hezbollah in Lebanon, for example, the Ansar Allah in Yemen. And I feel that those who keep repeating these empty slogans like Iran's proxies and Iran-backed military groups, I feel that despite the fact that they are far from the truth, of course, but they do not grasp what this stage means for the
They don't.
region.
But this, I think, okay. I think it's. I always argued that one of the biggest problem of racists is that their own stupidity backfires, right? Because you kind of convince yourself that the world is behaves in a certain way. You have this perception that, for example, I am of a certain skin color, and other people of the different skin colors and ethnicities behave this way. It's predictable that they do so, and it backfires because this is not real world. This is not the real world. This is not how uh, people behave, and therefore you can never be there. You can never really grasp any truth or learn. Palestinians learn, the Israelis don't learn. I mean, that's the issue, because they perceive Palestinians in a certain way. And they don't really understand that the Palestinians are not only people with agency, the Lebanese are people with agency, the Yemeni people are people with agency, and it doesn't always fit in perfectly into that pre existing model. So you have Iran and you have the proxies, and the proxies receive weapons and aid from Iran, and then they behave according to the diktats of the Iranians. And whatever the outcome is, it has to fit perfectly into this pre existing notion. That's where they were wrong. And this is why Israel failed on October 7th. It wasn't about, oh, it was a surprise attack. It wasn't a surprise attack. And we know that because the Israeli media is telling us it wasn't a surprise attack. The Israeli media tells us that the Israelis, even the head of the Shin Bet, now we know, the head of the Shin Bet made urgent telephone calls the night before, saying that there is a different kind of deployment for Palestinians at the border. What are we going to do about it? And they did nothing. Israeli female recruits reported, that seeing Palestinian fighters behaving in a different way or training in a different way, reported that to their superiors. They did nothing. They did not anticipate that Hezbollah is going to enter to the war on October 8th, and definitely did not anticipate that Ansarullah in Yemen are going to also enter the war as well, because they behaved according to that false, kind of understanding that since Iran is a national political actor, its proxies, so called proxies, would have to behave according to the same kind of rational dialectics imposed on them by Iran. But the Palestinians did not get a permission from Iran to do what they did on October 7th. And they did not get a permission from Iran to carry on with the war and to refuse any ceasefire agreement that does not ensure the complete withdrawal of the Israeli army from Gaza. Hezbollah did not wait for Iran to get a permission, nor did Hezbollah even know that Palestinians, and I do fully believe the words of Hassan Nasrallah when he said, "We were not asked, but we jumped in there because that's what the unity of the square is." And that kind of takes me to my final point regarding this issue. If you tell me resistance, the word resistance, and it's not connected to ordinary people on the street, I will tell you it's not a resistance. It's just a cliche. I mean, Mahmoud Abbas talks about resistance. He talks about the popular resistance. What popular resistance in the West Bank, Mr. Mahmoud Abbas? What are you talking about? We see you oppressing and suppressing people who try to even share some ideas on Facebook. So you don't believe in any kind of resistance. You can say resistance until the dogs come home, but at the end of the day, if you don't behave according to the norms of resistance, it's just an empty slogan. So when the term unity of the square came about, it's not like I was in doubt, but it was not tested. It didn't really mean anything unless it was tested. It was tested in the most dramatic way on October 7th. And indeed, it was implemented to the letter. It was astonishing, even by the standards of people who are quite enthusiastic about seeing Arabs rising and helping one another. It's a game changer. Now, the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon took place before the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. We know that. And of course, many pseudo intellectuals kind of jumped on the fray and said, "See, we told you Hezbollah is not sincere. We told you that." No, 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 it doesn't work that way. Nobody said that unity of the squares automatically means having no rational political thought, not looking at your immediate local politics and making decisions according to that. Nobody said that. What really matters about the unity of the squares is that social, political, popular bond still there or not? Do Lebanese people, especially in the south, see themselves connected in terms of fate, in terms of struggle, in terms of goals and objectives with the Palestinians? Yes, they do. Do people in Yemen feel that way? Yes, they do. And as long as that connection, that bond is there, political decisions can be made for reasons. I mean, this is not suicide nationalism, as they call it. This is far more rational process, but the bond between these nations remain in effect.
I feel even this concept, of saying if they stopped fighting, if they agreed to a ceasefire, it means that they abandoned Palestinians. I think that even that is the outcome of a racist mentality. You remove the political agency and the strategic and tactical agency of these groups from the ground. You think that this is some kind of romantic concept. We are talking here about groups that have a certain strategy and they carry out precise, moves in order to achieve these strategies. Another thing, Ramzy, because you mentioned the fact that, of course, some Israelis, at least some sectors of Israeli security establishment, knew about October 7. But I really want to debunk this Western concept, because every time we do a webinar or an interview or a conference, there is always that question: are you sure Israel did not do this on purpose to destroy Palestinians? So October 7 isn't the outcome of the Palestinian people, of the resistance, but it's an Israeli move. I feel that this concept should be debunked.
Well, it's an Orientalist concept. I mean, we are familiar. We are very much familiar with this kind of Orientalism that kind of ultimately led to some kind of self-doubt. I don't want to use the term self-hate; it's overused, but kind of self-doubt that we as oppressed groups, whether we are Arabs or blacks or natives of any kind anywhere, we really don't make decisions. We do not affect decisions. We are incapable of having strategy and sustaining that strategy and thinking long term politics. Everything is in the hands of America. I mean, this is the notion. And I get that in the Middle East a lot. And it's really quite frustrating, to be honest with you, because they kind of deprive ordinary people. I mean, a million Palestinians marching at the exact same time from south to north. They are all chanting for victory. They tell you, I am going to go back to a destroyed house and I am going to go to visit the graves of my father, my mother, my children, my this, with big smiles and say, but it was all worth our victory. We won because we stayed and we defeated the Israeli military machine. And you have someone in Brussels or Washington or somewhere else telling him, no, you fool, you've lost. Why? How, how can you completely dismiss the experience of those people who are living in the ground? It is them who dug the graves and buried the bodies. It is them who have lost everything, yet you think that you have the power to tell them that they actually have lost, even though they tell you that they have won. It is that mindset. That mindset exists in the Arab world, unfortunately. It doesn't exist in Gaza itself. This is why I have argued many times in the past that from an intellectual point of view, Gaza is the only free Arab entity because they have liberated their mind from mental slavery. That's the truth of it. They see things with total clarity. And so this is why it's so frustrating watching people saying things like, oh yeah, but Netanyahu knew all along. Oh, the Americans were on it from the very start. Oh, everybody was aware. So what did you do here? You deprived the Palestinians from any element of agency. And you
Yes.
said, even now, you're still at the receiving end of some sort of diabolical American, Israeli, imperialist Western thinking, and you just too stupid to see it. That's the real intellectual crisis that exists right now. This morning I received an email from some Arab journalist somewhere, that was kind of like a news group. He or she writes art weekly, kind of regular articles, and she shares them with this group. And it says the title. It really made my blood boil. Honestly, it really did. The title goes, "Not victory, not defeat, just genocide." Well, thank you very much for this addition. But how can you be based in Dubai or be based in Cairo or in Beirut decided to make that decision on behalf of the people? Yes, of course, it was genocide. But here's the thing about genocide, people. I cannot control the action of my enemy. And if you are going to be holding me accountable for the violence of my enemy, then every colonized nation is responsible for its colonialism. Every nation that has suffered war and genocide, from
Yeah.
Bosnia to Rwanda to everywhere else, is actually responsible for that genocide. Saying, well, you provoked them, you provoked the enemy, therefore you are the one to be held responsible for that genocide. It is inhumane. Of course, it was genocide, but that's on the Israelis and the Israeli war criminals that must pay the price for that genocide, not on the Palestinians.
And I mean, unfortunately, we are seeing this translated politically by the Palestinian Authority, which is openly blaming Palestinians for the genocide, and this is leading to certain considerations in the occupied West Bank. And the West Bank was the other point that I would like to address with you, Ramzy, briefly. Like, many people also wonder what is going to happen now in the West Bank, because Gaza, seems to have reported like a victory that cannot be denied. But what's going to happen in the West Bank, where Palestinians who decided to resist despite everything have to challenge two layers of occupation, in a sense?
Right, because you have a cultural conflict now. A cultural conflict, not, I mean, Palestinians we are all essentially the same culture, but I mean, in terms of political culture, you have two conflicts. One side that has, from the very beginning of the war, trying to emphasize that the resistance is responsible for the genocide. Palestinians have lost. There is no element of victory that can be gleaned out of what happened in Gaza. And that's the Palestinian Authority. And on the other side, there are those who are saying there is a much bigger intellectual context here we need to look at. Since 1948, we Palestinians have never ever enjoyed a true victory against Israel. We have never managed to show Israel that there are limits to your military, what you can achieve through military power, through firepower. And you would say, wait a minute, but 2008, the war of 2008 and 9 in Gaza, 2012, 2014, the Unity Intifada 2021, and all the other mini wars that happened in between, they do kind of demonstrate that Israel was kind of reaching some sort of a limit. But never before has actually Israel tried to destroy the whole of Gaza. And by the way, I would get back to the issue of the cultural conflict in the West Bank. Regarding, there was always this argument, and a lot of Arabs used to make it, and it was always very frustrating when you hear it. When people would say, do you think that you can win over Israel? Well, Israel has the power to completely destroy Gaza several times over. Well, Israel just did.
Yeah.
Israel has destroyed the whole of Gaza. All of the infrastructure, all the hospitals, schools, mosques, and churches, 90% of the homes, and the other 10% are about to fall. They are ailing. And so yes, your prophecy has come true, my friend. Israel has destroyed all of Gaza and still lost. This gives credibility to the point that we have been making all along, that this is not about firepower, it's about will. It's about the collective will. So now you have these two cultures in the West Bank. One that at one point maybe did scare people off from resisting in the West Bank in the beginning of the war. But when you see the prisoners coming out, kissing the ground and saying, this is God first has caused my freedom, and the resistance second. Thank you, Gaza. Everyone in the West Bank, thank you, Gaza. They are so now you have the Palestinian Authority chasing after people in the streets, taking down their
Yes,
flags,
their
taking
flags
down their
not
signs.
celebrate, which is unbelievable, but it's happening.
So and this is the real fear. The real fear is that for them, for the Palestinian Authority and Israel, because now they are coordinating. Thank you very much. They are working together. So they make our life a lot easier. When we always try to
Yes,
make this point, wherever I went, Ya Ammi, the Palestinian Authority and Israel are working together. They are collaborators for Israel. Oh, Ramzy, I think you are a little bit too much with this point. Well, thank you. Now they are attacking Jenin at the same time. One is attacking from the north and the other is attacking from all other directions. What do you have to say for yourself, my
and
friend?
even using the same excuses like, oh, it was armed groups who killed journalists, it was armed groups who killed children.
They
So
are using the same, not only the same Israeli tactics. I
yeah,
think it was the Independent newspaper in Britain. I can't remember, the Independent or the Guardian said some of the tactics used by the Palestinian Authority is even more brutal than
then
those of Israel, and others are saying no, no, they are using the exact same tactics. Engineer. And they are using the same media propaganda and the same lies, and they are limiting the work of journalists the same way that the Israelis are limiting the work of journalists. So now the Palestinian Authority have become an arm for Israel in an open way. So the outcome of this cultural war, political cultural war in the West Bank, is going to determine the direction of Palestinians in the West Bank. I think it's very clear that the West Bank has internalized the Palestinian experience about popular collective resistance. I'm not saying that this means that the West Bankers are going to go to the street tomorrow with, guns blazing. It doesn't have to be that way. But I mean, the idea that people must rise and collectively resist in order for them to wrest their freedom out of the hands of settler colonial violent Israel is now the only option on the table. Else, all other options not only have failed, but those who have been promoting these options, i.e., the Palestinian Authority, is now openly working with Israel to suppress popular resistance in the West Bank.
and indeed, you mentioned this concept, the idea. Many times now we have heard this thing, you cannot defeat an idea, you cannot dismantle an idea. And I want to mention the article that you wrote yesterday for the Palestine Chronicle, the one about, the Israeli scholar, Mordechai Kedar, having a certain idea of what victory means for Palestinians. And of course, it was, a racist idea, also orientalist, with the fighter only having two fingers atop of a mosque. And he said, because he survived, it means that he won. And you dismiss that concept. You said, no, it's not exactly like that. I would like for you to explain that concept, because I think it's very important to define victory and loss, since this is the topic of.
That takes me back to the concept of Orientalism. I mean, Mordecai Kedar is a regular face, not only on Israeli media, he travels internationals, like the guy with the real wisdom. Let's see what Kedar has to say. And Kedar is, it's an intellectual Nazi. Who says that? Who goes on television? Oh, by the way, this guy speaks Arabic very well. He's supposedly an expert in Arabic literature. How can you be an expert in our literature? How can you read our Mahmoud Darwish and Samih Al Qasim and Ibrahim Tuqan and Fadwa Tuqan and still have these racist ideas? That's what happened when you live in complete intellectual isolation. So this guy is imagining this scenario: all of Gaza destroyed, all of Gaza obliterated. Only very few people have survived. One of them stands on top of a mosque. At this point, they destroyed all 1,200 mosques in Gaza. So let's say on top of a destroyed mosque. He doesn't have legs. He doesn't have one arm. And in the other arm, it only has two fingers, in which he doesn't fire at anybody. He just flashes the victory sign. In his mind, it means that Israel has lost. So he's promoting the genocide of the Palestinians very early on, telling you, I understand Arab culture. I've studied these people. And I know for them it's a mental thing. And he is right regarding this. But the way he expresses that understanding, he does it in the most Nazi fascist way, that you need to make sure that that person with the two fingers who is completely amputated from he doesn't get his moment. Kill them all. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying.
Which
Kill
is
them all.
fantastic. Yeah.
And but at the end, what happened? What happened? Those who survived the genocide, everyone has flashed the victory sign. Everyone, children, men, women,
Field defense
fighters,
workers,
civil defense workers, doctors, everybody has flashed the victory sign. I would love to see what Mordechai has to say about this.
absolutely. And this, leads me to the final point, in a sense, like, um we were talking about the before about Nufal, and all the leaders, many leaders we have mentioned today were assassinated. But of course, this didn't change anything in the dynamics of the resistance. So Nufal said, Gaza is the long arm, Gaza is the sword. So Gaza is ahead of this historic change that we are witnessing. And I really think that Gaza is the sword that is leading this global movement of resistance. Do you agree with me? Like, what can Gaza teach to the world, to everybody resisting in the
I
world?
mean, here's the thing. I was born and raised in Gaza, and I do remember the numerous, endless conversations about who is going to be the one who comes to rescue us. And once in a while, people would say, "Oh, Algeria, and the Algerian army is going to come." Oh no, the Jordan, oh, Egypt will not leave us alone. No, Egypt, there's a breaking point. Excuse me, where Egypt is going to come in and try to help out. And we waited and we waited and we waited, and no liberators came, no armies crossed any borders. We were left alone, brutalized day after day, year after year. At the end of the day, it actually turned out that what Che Guevara has said at one point was correct. There are no liberators. The comrade had said, no liberators, the people, he said, liberate themselves. I don't even know if Che Guevara, had anticipated that the power of that statement is going to reverberate in the way it did in a place like Gaza. He would have been so excited to see that vision, that prophecy has actually manifested itself in the most incredible way. Of course, Palestine is not yet liberated, but Gaza was liberated by the people who liberated themselves. Not a faction, not an individual, not a Salahuddin, not a leader, the people. And now the Arabs are looking at Gaza and saying, how do we use that Gaza model to liberate ourselves? And the same thing applies to many other places in the global south. If the Gazans have done it under the most extreme conditions, one can imagine why can't we do it in far easier and more accessible platforms?
Thank you, Ramzi. I think this was a very important discussion.
I think so. And I hope that you can always join us. We are going to be recording an episode once a week for a while before we start doing 2 episodes per week. We need your support. We need your encouragement. We are going to be inviting some distinguished guests, always giving prominency to the voice of ordinary people, of course. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hopefully, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.